This is SoulCharge, the podcast for women leaders to take the highest level of ownership of their power to create results now. I'm your host, Stacy B. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of SoulCharge. I'm Stacy B, and I am joined today by Ryan. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm so good, Stace. How are you?
He's doing great. I am super, super jacked about this episode today because one of my favorite things is highlighting hidden things that women leaders don't think about in the path to success, in the path to creation. And today's episode is going to be packed full of the hidden ways you are people pleasing. And we hope to surprise you in a few ways, because what we found in our journey and what we see on a lot of our women clients is that this is universal. These things we're talking about today are universal, and they sneak up on you when you least expect it. Rye, any thoughts?
Well, the reason why I love this topic so much is, I think you guys know the story, but Stacy and I work together, right? Like she's been my mentor since 2021. And then coming together on SoulCharge has just been one of the most like fun and enlightening experiences I've had to date in my life. And it's been so good. But when we talked about SoulCharge in the beginning and who it was for, Stacy kept talking about people pleasing and people pleasing and people pleasing. And I'm like, I don't think our people identify as that, right? Because I didn't. If you would have talked to me about people pleasing in the beginning of our work together, I would not have resonated with those words at all. But then when Stacy was like, well, we do this and we do this and we do this and we do this. And I'm like, oh yeah, I totally do all those things. But the word people pleaser or even approval seeking was not something that really resonated with me. So I really love this conversation because I do think that high achievers like us tend to maybe excuse our behavior because we think it's for the greater good, or because we think it's going to get us closer to our goals, or because it's just this one time I made this one exception for this one person. So that's not me. And I think that this is just a really beautiful conversation, and I'm excited about it.
Yes. Well, and with regards to people pleasing and approval seeking, I didn't relate to those either. In fact, I remember the day that it was like brought to my attention that I was that. I was astounded. I was taken back and honestly in denial because I didn't ever see myself as that. But what my first step was that sort of woke me up to this idea was I had come across the book Codependency No More. And I know I told you to read that in our work together as we started. But the idea of codependency no more, reading that book for me was how I was codependent or relying on my business or achievements to make me feel enough, give me happiness, give that sense of fulfillment, which never was the case. And so that was my first kind of introduction to this world of, oh my gosh, this is real. This is what I'm doing. And it really rooted in, this desire to keep the peace, manage everyone else's emotions, or keep the deal together, keep the clients happy, like you said, just give that one exception this one time. And then that turned into a habit and a way that I was providing incredible client service, which couldn't have been further from the truth. And so I'd love to dive into, how do you see most often with our clients this people pleasing show up?
Yeah, I think the number one way that I see from our clients is prioritizing other people's feelings above our own. Like that to me is probably the most common way. And like you said, it may show up in over delivering for clients, right? Not holding a boundary. I'm not going to take client meetings on Friday, but this client said the only time they can meet is Friday, right? Or I'm not going to schedule calls before this time, but this is the only time that this prospect can get on the phone with me, right? And so it's actually coming across, now that I think of it, it's two ways, right? Other people's feelings are more important than my own, or sacrificing my own boundaries in order to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z. But for me, it's always rooted in, if I make this other person happy, they will like me. If I make this other person happy, they will buy from me. If I make this other person happy, they will continue to do business with me. They will like me. And that's really, like I said, what I see overwhelmingly, if it comes down to, why are you doing this? Because I want to be liked. And, but yeah, those are the biggest ways I see.
So one thing that popped into my mind as you said that, right, is a question. And the question is, what do you think it is we're seeking when we sacrifice a boundary for someone else? In other words, like why do you think we're doing that?
I think we do it because we think it's going to depict the outcome, right? We're trying to control the way that person feels so that we can control the outcome.
Yes. Because if you look at the clients we work with, they are highly successful and, you know, doing things where they're sacrificing themselves for a client or a team member or whatever the case might be. It totally makes sense that that would be coming from control because we often, type A women leaders, are very controlling because we have learned and been conditioned over the years that if we exert control or exert force over this thing, then it's going to go the way that we want it to. And also, I believe that there's a certain level of safety that we've developed in controlling things and being really controlling. That's how not only, we've achieved the success that we have, but also defined the safety for ourselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it totally lays, like, it goes back to safety. And you have said this before, probably in a podcast recording, if not often in our 7-day experiments, is the idea that, when we try to control how other people see us or feel about it, like, it's the ultimate power leak, right? Like, it's the ultimate way that we're not being all of ourselves, right? Because we may agree to something we don't want to agree to, or laugh at a joke that we don't think is funny, or get involved in a bitch fest about something else because we want to belong. And you talk so much about belonging, Stacy, in our experiments. That's where I was going with that, is because in our DNA, not belonging is unsafe. Right? If we go back to, caveman days, not being a part of the tribe was dangerous, so we had to say what we needed to say to not get kicked out so that we did not die or we did not get eaten by a tiger. And so that's still coded in our DNA. And that's why, as high achievers, we don't think about it consciously. It's not a conscious choice of, I'm going to say this thing to make this person feel a certain way so I feel safe, right? This is completely unconscious. But it comes from this belonging need, this tribal need that is wired in us. And so being agreeable is a big one. And I don't know if men are taught this, but as women, we're taught that, right? The more agreeable you are, the more liked you are. And in that case, it was typically the opposite sex, right? It was like, oh, men don't like, opinionated women. That was kind of my thing. I had a lot to say, believe it or not. And it was like, it's just not, like, we've got to be agreeable if we want to be liked. And I think it's all wrapped up in the belonging, and that in our body, belonging equals safety.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that was coming through as you were talking is this idea that where we try to control is where we are controlled.
Oof.
I want to say that again. Where we try to control, where we are controlled. The ways in which we try to assert control are the ways that we can uncover our biggest power leaks. If we look at people pleasing or approval seeking or keeping the peace or wanting to be liked, all of those things, that is an effort to control the outcome so that there's safety. But in that process of trying to control everything, we become controlled because we give our power away to everyone else. I likened it to a bunch of drunk drivers driving your car. And it's like you have taken your hands off the wheel when you prioritize approval seeking, people pleasing behaviors. But where it's coming from is a good place. And I think that that's what we want to shine a light on for you podcast listeners, is that the areas in which you're trying to control by approval seeking behavior or wanting to be liked or wanting to keep the peace, that it's actually coming from a place of wanting to control the outcome, because you know that if you are well liked, if you do as much as possible for other people, you are going to be perceived as successful, knowledgeable, great reputation, all of these things externally that equal a successful business owner or a successful woman leader. But the thing that we don't realize is that in all of that, we give our control and our power away to the people that we're prioritizing that approval with.
So let me ask you this question. How do we reconcile that, right? Because what we can logically say is, well, because most of the people listening, most of you listeners are either, business owners or people with careers. And so whether it's your team or your clients, either way, if they don't like me, if they don't respect me, if they don't see me in a certain light, then are people going to buy from me if they don't like me, right? Or is my team going to follow me? Say, so this is for my corporate leader who's like, I have a team of people that I don't want to prioritize being liked. I understand it's not getting me the result that I desire, but if they don't like me, they're not going to follow me. They're not going to let me lead. And the same thing on the client side. If I show up on the internet and I'm just a jerk to people, or I just say what I really want to say and people don't like me, who's going to buy from me? Like, that is the fear going through everyone's head when we talk about this. So how do we reconcile this prioritization of self, right? Not this approval seeking or people pleasing behavior with, we live in a world where we do need cooperation from others.
Yes. Yeah. It's such a good question. And I think that, the first thing I want to shine a light on is this idea of what reputation means. I think for a long time, reputation, I know this was very true for me, reputation was mixed in with people pleasing and wanting to be liked. And let me give you just a quick example of this. If there was a disagreement or someone disagreed with the way I thought something should go, a difference of opinion was sort of mushed in with, because it was under the people pleasing and approval seeking category. It was mixed in with, if I stand on this sword, my reputation is at stake. If I stand in the posture of a difference of opinion or things are going to go this way and people don't agree with that, that could cost me my reputation. And in my early years of my career, I would actually self-sacrifice for my reputation. And there is I think there's a defining line that I wanted to speak to in that as I answer your question, because it's so easy to think that we're being of service. But here's the truth. You cannot be of service if you are empty yourself. You've all heard the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. But what we're talking about is a little bit different. And that is, you cannot be supportive of another person if you aren't supporting yourself. You cannot come from incompleteness or indebtedness in yourself because you're constantly putting other people first and really contribute. And so when we talk about how do we reconcile this, the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of self-possession, this idea of, what would it be like if you stood in your opinions, if you stood in what you think is right, and you didn't worry about who would agree with you, but instead you worried about representing truth? If instead you focused on representing what was real and authentic and true, here's what happens, is you actually get to lead and model what being a connected leader looks like. Because when we are pursuing people pleasing or approval seeking, what we're doing in that is we're leaving ourselves out of the equation. So a lot of times we'll go and make something happen, but in that making of it happen, we are completely sacrificing or compromising ourselves. And so if we first start with this idea of, what does it look like to lead and run my business or lead just in the world in total self-possession, what you find very quickly is that all of the ways in which you were making things happen or approval seeking, people pleasing, you'll notice that the volume almost starts to get turned down on those things. In other words, you don't feel so drawn to do that because there's a better way. And I think that that's part of what's missing for us as women leaders, is no one has told us about possessing to self. No one has talked about why we're doing the things that we're doing. And so when we can say, oh, there's a way of being in full self-possession, being safe with myself, and then dealing with things from that place, then what you'll find is you want the same for other people. Like, you want people to be in their convictions and opinions, and you want to create contrast in the world, right? By speaking your mind and they speak theirs, and a better tomorrow is formed because we're putting our brilliance together. Like, there isn't, no one wins when we self-sacrifice.
Yeah. I think that's the nail on the head, right? Nobody wins when we self-sacrifice, because when we self-sacrifice, which is ultimately what we're saying by people pleasing or approval seeking, right? It is a self-sacrifice. I am sacrificing myself for someone else in some capacity, which that means, whether that means I'm not speaking my truth, I'm not holding a boundary, I'm saying yes when I want to say no. I worry so much about hurting other people's feelings that I do things that are not aligned with me. Or, again, and that can show up a million different ways, but that all goes back to separation, right? And that's like the first concept we teach in our 7-day experiment, right? Is the reason why it is so important that other people feel a certain way about us is because we think that what we want is separate from us. And so in order for you to like me, buy from me, follow me, do what I need you to do, finish the deal, complete the whatever, right? I have to do something else, but that still puts all of our power externally.
Yes.
Which again continues to fuel the lie of separation.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I just love the direction this conversation is going. Like, yes, yes, and more. Yes. The lie of separation affirms and reaffirms by us saying, I need to basically manipulate you by controlling you by people pleasing.
Yeah.
I'm going to get what I want. You also get what you want. In that self-sacrifice, in that compromise, what happens is we reaffirm the lie. And the lie is that I have to earn, manipulate, control, do whatever is dysfunctional to get what I want, which affirms that what we want is outside of us, which affirms what Ryan was just saying, this lie of separation, that what we want is constantly out there, which is the ultimate illusion. And that's really what we want to empower you all with, is seeing how this is originating. Because I know for both of us, we had no idea. We had no idea what was playing in the background. And it's like, if someone could have shined a light on this, how much earlier could we have been free to stop those bad behaviors and really start focusing on creating?
Can I share an example here, Stace?
Yes.
So this is a simple one. This is in my relationship with my significant other, and he recently got a new job, which is really exciting, but there's way more demand on his attention, right? So his phone and his text messages are much more urgent because they are things that are actively happening in the business. And so that's led to him being on his phone more. And we talked about it in the beginning, right? Like, I don't mind, do what you need to do. The business hours are like, he often comes home while there are still active jobs happening in the world. So if those jobs are happening and there's conversation around them, or like after books are closed, he'll get phone calls and stuff. And so I was like, I don't mind, right? Like, I am an entrepreneur at heart. Like, I get needing to be available, but what I'm not okay with is, like, when you and I are having a conversation, you can't just exit the conversation because your phone rings, right? I need to at least know you're exiting. And so we've talked about it multiple times, but it happened again over the weekend where I was literally speaking and he picks up his phone and answers something. And I, in the past, would have like thrown a fit and been a big baby about it and been like, meh, 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 meh. And what I basically said was, listen, like, I understand what is happening. However, when you do that, it makes me feel like what I'm saying is not important. And I have now asked you multiple times to not do that. And so at this point in the game, an apology is not acceptable, because apology without a change of behavior is manipulation. Like, and that is, I'm not okay with it.
Say that again.
Right? Apology without a change in behavior is manipulation. You're apologizing because you want to appease me, because you realize what you did was rude and disrespectful. But if you don't change it, you're basically saying that my needs are not important. And that is not something I am okay with. And he kind of was like, hit, yep. Okay, I understand. Right. And it was because I didn't throw a fit and I wasn't passive aggressive and I didn't like, let me tell you all the things you're doing wrong. And I said that this is the way this behavior makes me feel. And you've told me that you're not going to do that anymore, and you're still doing it. And I'm not okay with it. In a very direct and calm way, he was like, you're right.
Mhm.
There was no room for him making me wrong, him justifying his behavior in any of those ways, because I was just complete and direct and completed with, like, this is the way it makes me feel, and that's not okay. And you've addressed it, but you've not actually changed your behavior, and that's not okay with me. And in the past, like I said, I would have just been really passive aggressive and just been a big enough brat until the behavior changed. Like, that is the way that I would have shown up in the past. Every time he picked up his phone, I would have left the room, exited the room, ended the conversation, made a snide comment. Like, that's absolutely, the way that I knew how to get things done in the past. If I was just a big enough bitch, you will do what I ask you to do. And I'm not available for that anymore, right? Like, I don't want to get to that point. I never want any of my relationships to feel that way, nor do I want to behave like a child. And so I decided that I was not going to do that. And I was instead going to be very direct. And I used big words like respect and unimportant, which are things that both are hot buttons for him. But I didn't use them to manipulate him. I used them to show him what was happening behaviorally. And by me being like, I'm not available for it. And so I'm just sharing this story because in the past, that sort of direct communication would have not felt safe, right? I can't just come out and say what I want to say. Heaven forbid, but by coming out and saying what I wanted to say and using the words that I wanted to use to make my point in a kind and direct way, I got exactly what I wanted, which was him to realize that it was a problem and that it was making me feel like what I was saying was not important. Why am I going to start a conversation? Because your phone's just going to ring, And so go ahead.
No, I just, the comment that you made around an apology without a change in behavior is manipulation. I think for a lot of the women listening, they can be on the receiving end of that, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, we set a boundary.
Yep.
Nothing changes. There's apologies, but the behavior doesn't change. What in your mind is happening when someone is apologizing, but not changing the behavior? Obviously, it's I shouldn't say no one, but a small percentage of people are trying to manipulate. Like, most of us are not conscious that that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So what do you think is happening that there's a gap there?
I think it's just a matter of, in some instance, we think what we're dealing with is more important than other people.
Yeah.
Like, I know I felt that way. In the height of my ego, my work was ultimately the most important thing because it paid the bills, it put food on the table, it paid for this vacation, it afforded that car, it afforded this lifestyle. So it is a priority, period, end of. So I would apologize, like, it's for me, I would apologize in a really empty way with no desire to change the behavior because I thought the behavior was required for me to get the result that I wanted.
The piece around this idea of an apology without a change in behavior is manipulation is actually totally tied into what we're talking about with regards to approval seeking and people pleasing in my mind. And the connection that I want to make here is that when you are people pleasing and approval seeking and keeping the peace and coming from a place of just wanting everyone to be happy, what you are doing is setting yourself up for failure in the realm of being able to take ownership. And why that is such an incredible power leak for you as a women leader is because when you're putting everyone first, when you are trying to control things by way of keeping the peace, what happens is you completely abdicate your ability to take ownership, to make powerful decisions, and to move things forward in the way that you truly want, because you are unable to take ownership because you're not a part of the equation. And I think that that's the tie-in with this idea of an apology without a behavior change is manipulation. It's essentially what we're doing to ourselves. And so I just wanted to take that a step further is like, when you are apologizing to yourself, or you say, I'm just going to make this exception one last time for this client, or you let yourself down that time just once more, what you are doing is you are manipulating your power and playing small. And it's actually the thing that if you change, you are going to start playing a completely different level of life and a completely bigger game because you're no longer in this manipulation triangle with yourself.
Yeah. I actually just created a piece of content around this that speaks directly to this. Like the things we do to ourselves, we would never do to other people. Like I jokingly said, like, you know, when your alarm goes off in the morning, if you had an early morning client meeting or a flight to catch, you would never hit snooze. You would never not get up. You would never reset the alarm for 30 minutes later because you're tired. But we do that when we set the alarm to get up to exercise or pour into ourselves, right? Take our time to journal and meditate and really focus on our alignment. Like we blow that meeting off all day long, right? Or I'm going to get that workout in, or I'm going to do that activity, or I'm going to follow up with that person, or I'm going to reach out. Like we do that to ourselves in a way we would never do to other people, right? Like we would never just not show up for coffee with a friend without explanation as to why we weren't coming. You know, like we would never just skip a meeting or sleep in or not deliver a client deliverable on time. But true. We'll do it to ourselves all day long. And to me, that's again part of the ways that we will sacrifice ourselves to get the client deliverable on time, but we'll never keep we won't keep the commitment to ourselves because it's no big deal, because we've created this habit, this fracture, this break in trust with ourselves, which again just perpetuates the whole cycle.
You had written an email that you sent out to your list recently. And I would love if you could, and I actually have the email bullet points here, if I'm sure you have it there too, but would you mind reading like word for word those bullet points? Because I think that for those of you that are listening, it doesn't always sound like what you think. Like when you think about people pleasing, I know for me, I thought about that friend that never could like get the relationship right. And she always was in these cycles with relationships. But the way that you have articulated how the people pleasing shows up, right, I just feel like would be so powerful for the listeners. Yeah,
I have it pulled up right here. So people, what it says is for people like you and I, and when I say you and I mean like high achievers, people who don't identify with things like people pleasing and approval seeking, is things like saying yes when we want to say no, doing things because we want to be liked, accepted, or seen, even though they're not fully aligned, saying yes to the collaboration invitation because you like the person, not because it's the best fit for your business and your audience, making changes to your offer, marketing, or messaging because so-and-so suggested you should, changing your mind because someone else didn't like your idea, not holding a team member accountable because you don't want to have a difficult conversation, not holding a standard when someone gives you subpar work, or not holding a boundary with a client, team member, or really anyone.
Those are so good. Because those are the ways that every single one of us, like at some point in time, have done something to the tune of those bullet points that you just shared. Of course. We don't look at it like, oh, we're approval seeking. We often look at it like we're making it happen. This is what it looks like to run a business. These are the sacrifices that you have to make, or this is that so-and-so, to your point around like changing your offer, the marketing. Oh, so-and-so knows more than I do. They've been in this world longer than I have, right? Giving our power away by putting someone else up on a pedestal.
I honestly think that is one of the biggest ways high achievers give our power away, is by thinking other people know more than we do. And we see this in the world by way of influencers and like really big like business coaches and different things like that, where people are like, well, I don't run my business like so-and-so, therefore something must be wrong. And I'm just going to call it out because I've called them out before. Like, I think of this a lot with the ClickFunnels world, with like Russell Brunson. And I've met Russell. I know Russell. I think his heart is in the right place. But what has happened on the internet is people think that his way of running a webinar on the internet is the end all be all holy grail of client enrollment. And if you don't do that, you're doing it wrong. And I see this over and over and over again, especially with people that play online, that this is the end all be all holy grail. That person must know more than I do, even though people hate that model. And I mean, I'm one of them. Like I hate webinars. If you have to emotionally manipulate people to buy from you, you're doing it wrong. They're not great clients. They're not a good fit. Like they're not ready for your work. But that is literally what the perfect webinar is we make them feel like they can't exist without them. And then we tell them that the value of what we're giving them is so great, but we're giving them a really significant discount because we care so much. Like what are the actual, that's literally what we're doing in webinars and launches and bonuses and countdown timers and all the things that make online marketing is manipulating the shit out of people because we don't believe enough in our own power to say, this is what it is. This is how much it costs. Do you want to buy it?
Yes.
Go find me a Fortune 500 CEO who's running webinars with countdown timers and bonuses to get people to buy their shit. It's not happening.
Yes.
But we just assume that guy must know more than I do.
Well, and how many programs and courses? I know I've signed up for countless programs and courses because they knew more than I did, or the way in which they concocted the 7 steps to position it just right. They knew more than I did. And what we're saying is this idea of someone may have packaged it in such a way where that strategy and application really resonates with you. But that doesn't override your brilliance. It's the brilliance combined with the execution of whatever that thing is that resonates that we are speaking to. There's a difference. And it's important to see the difference so that your magic still shines and you are not falling on the sword for someone that would only fall on a broom for you. That's from that codependency no more book. Like, in a way, we give our power away to these gurus to help us package our things when, yes, we may need structure and formatting. That their thoughts don't override your idea. That's another way of people pleasing. It just sneaks up on us.
I once had a client tell me, well, I had a coach told me that nobody would buy that, so I changed the name of it. Like, and again, well-meaning, like person with a big heart, but there's this thing that happens. It's like, well, I transacted, I gave this person money, therefore I now have to do, what they tell me to do, or I now have to do these things. And what we're saying here, guys, it's both and, right? It's both learning a methodology that feels really aligned and learning a new skill that you don't have, and being able to discern what parts of that are a fit for you. And that's what we're saying in almost every area of your life, right? Like, this isn't the way that Stacy and I are and our clients are looking to live our lives is not in the way where, like, middle finger to the world, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. We're looking to live our lives in a way, where do we bring the highest and best good in every area of our lives? And so while I have a bit of a rebellious streak and I like to lean into it in some ways, that's not really what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is when the relationship with yourself is your number one priority, where your ideas, your values, your, inspired creativity and magic is the number one priority. And then you pick and choose from all these different options as to how you want to bring that thing to the world. And that's, this level of self-possession, self-devotion, self-trust that really comes into play again when we stop saying yes when we want to say no.
Yes. Right. I think this is my favorite episode like we've ever done, like all time. All episodes, like all conversations. I have goosebumps on my goosebumps. Like, this just is such a conversation that women leaders need to hear and process and contemplate. And the true up level that you are seeking, podcast listeners, is through this portal of seeing where you are playing small because you're keeping the peace, to see where you are saying yes when you mean no, and to correct that so that the game of manipulation is in your favor. In other words, so that you are not giving your control over to things that are not worthy of controlling you. Right. So, any last thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
No, I think this is one, guys, you're going to have to listen to it a couple of times, right? Because every time you hear it, a new example is going to come up, because it's happening to me right now. And I'm like, oh, and this story and this story and this story. And I'm like, okay, we could be here for days, right? If we gave stories and examples of this, but this is what I really encourage you to listen to a couple of times, because the first time through, you're doing something else while you're listening to it. I know you are. But the next time through, some examples are going to come up, and then like wait a week or two and come back and listen to it again, because you're going to start to see all of these different places where you're really inadvertently giving your power away that you have made me, like gotten a lot of value from, right? I've gotten a lot of value from being liked, from my reputation, from people, asking me to do things because I always say yes, right? We've gotten so much value in that. So I think it's important that we come back and keep revisiting this conversation, because you're going to see that for most of us, there's very few areas of our life where that is not touched by this phenomenon. And it's one of the easiest ways to shore up our energy, so we can use that energy to create what we want instead of putting ourselves in trying to be in control of things we have no control over.
Yes. Oh, there has to be a part 2 to this. Podcast listeners, there will be, we promise, because there is so much more we want to go into. Awesome. Thank you, Rye. This was amazing.
Yes. Thanks, guys.
Are you loving SoulCharge? If so, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share an episode. We want to bring powerful content to women leaders each week so that women can be unleashed to create the results that they want now. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.